What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors is pushed to his absolute breaking point on live television? It only took 36 seconds of relentless mockery for Jim Broadbent to do something he had never done in his entire career: walk off set, leave the cameras rolling, and expose a host who forgot that respect cost nothing. Jim Broadbent arrived at the studio that morning like he always did, humble, prepared, ready to talk about his latest film project with enthusiasm and grace. The kind of guest every show dreams of having, an Oscar winner who never lets fame inflate his ego, a man who treats everyone from the director to the runner with the same kindness. He walked onto the set with a warm smile. The audience applauded. He waved, sat down in the guest chair, adjusted his microphone, and waited for what he assumed would be a pleasant conversation about his craft. Lorraine Kelly opened with what seemed like a standard question. "So, Jim, you're getting on a bit now, aren't you? Do you ever think about just, retiring and letting the younger actors have a go?" The audience went quiet. You could hear the discomfort ripple through the studio. Jim's smile faltered for just a moment. He recovered quickly because he's a professional. "Well, I love what I do," Jim said calmly. "I think as long as directors want to work with me and I'm still capable, I'll keep going. Age brings experience, and I hope that shows in my work." It was a gracious answer, mature, exactly what you'd expect from someone of his caliber. Lorraine didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and laughed. "Not with him. At him. Oh, come on, be serious. You must see all these young, handsome actors coming through and think, well, my time's done. Nobody wants to see an old man on screen anymore, do they?" The camera caught Jim's face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes widened slightly. He was processing what he just heard, trying to figure out if she really just said that on national television. "I think," Jim began carefully, "audiences appreciate good storytelling regardless of the age of the actors involved. Some of the greatest performances in cinema history have been from older actors." He was giving her an out, a chance to steer the conversation back to respectful territory, a chance to remember that she was speaking to a man who had given decades of his life to his craft. Lorraine ignored it completely. "But you're not exactly a leading man, though, are you? You're more of what do they call it? A character actor. The quirky sidekick type. Do you ever wish you'd been born better looking so you could have been a real star?" The silence that followed was deafening. Production assistants exchanged shocked glances. The camera operators kept filming because what else could they do? This was live television. There was no edit button, no way to take back what had just been said. Jim Broadbent sat very still. He looked down at his hands, then back up at Lorraine. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I've had a very fulfilling career. I've worked with incredible directors and talented actors. I've been fortunate enough to win awards and be part of films that meant something to people. I don't measure my worth by conventional standards of attractiveness." It was dignified, classy, everything she wasn't being. And still, Lorraine pressed on. "Well, that's a very diplomatic way of saying you're not conventionally attractive. Must be hard, though, watching someone like, I don't know, George Clooney or Brad Pitt get all the attention while you're stuck playing the funny little man in the background." That was the moment. That was when something shifted in Jim's expression. The moment when patience ran out, when professionalism hit its limit, when a good man realized he was being humiliated for entertainment. "I think," Jim said slowly, "that you're being incredibly rude." Lorraine's eyes lit up. She thought she'd gotten somewhere, thought she'd created a moment of drama that would get people talking. She didn't realize she'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," she said with a dismissive wave. "I'm just having a bit of fun. Can't you take a joke?" Jim stood up. Not dramatically, not with a big gesture. He simply stood, reached down, and unclipped his microphone. "What are you doing?" Lorraine asked, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in her voice. "I'm leaving," Jim said simply. "I came here to talk about my work, to discuss a film that I'm proud of, not to be insulted for your amusement." Lorraine's smile was frozen on her face, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that says someone's trying to maintain control of a situation that's slipping away fast. "Oh, come on, Jim, don't be silly. Sit back down. We're just chatting." Jim placed the microphone carefully on the chair. He looked directly at Lorraine, not with anger, with disappointment, which somehow felt worse. "Chatting involves mutual respect," he said. "You've made it clear you have none for me, so I'm not going to sit here and let you continue." He turned to the audience. I apologize to all of you for cutting this short. You deserve better than to watch someone be treated this way. And I deserve better than to be treated this way." The audience started clapping, slowly at first, then louder. Then they were on their feet. A standing ovation for a man who was walking off the set. Lorraine's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, annoyance, then something that looked like panic as she realized this was actually happening, on live television, in front of hundreds of thousands of viewers. "Jim, please," she said, and her voice had changed now, less confident, more desperate. "Don't do this. We can talk about the film. That's what you're here for." Jim paused at the edge of the set. He didn't turn around fully, just looked back over his shoulder. "That's what I was here for," he said, "but you decided to make it about something else entirely. You decided to use your platform to be cruel. I won't be part of that." And he walked off, past the cameras, past the producers who were frantically trying to figure out what to do, past the crew members who were giving him supportive nods. He just walked away. Lorraine was left sitting there, alone on the set, the camera still rolling, the audience still applauding for a man who was no longer in the building. She tried to laugh it off. "Well," she said, her voice brittle, "I guess some people can't handle a bit of banter." The audience went silent. Nobody laughed, nobody agreed. They just stared at her with a mix of disappointment and secondhand embarrassment. One woman in the front row shook her head slowly, visibly, deliberately. The camera caught it. That moment would become one of the most replayed clips of the entire incident. Lorraine tried to move on, tried to go to commercial, but her hands were shaking as she shuffled her notes. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke to the camera. "We'll be right back after this break," she managed. The moment the camera cut, the studio erupted. Production staff rushed onto the set. The floor manager was shouting into his headset. Other members of the team were already on their phones, no doubt dealing with the immediate fallout. But the damage was done. In the space of a few minutes, Lorraine Kelly had revealed something ugly. She'd shown that beneath the friendly television persona was someone who thought it was acceptable to belittle a guest, to mock their appearance, to question their relevance, to treat a legendary actor like he was there for her to pick apart. And Jim Broadbent had shown something else entirely, that there comes a point where walking away is the only dignified option, that standing up for yourself doesn't require shouting or aggression. Sometimes it just requires knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. The makeup artist who had worked with Jim that morning later told friends that he'd been nervous, not about the interview itself, but about getting the details of his film right. He'd wanted to do justice to the project, to his fellow cast members, to the director's vision. He'd spent the car ride to the studio going over talking points, making sure he could articulate why this story mattered. He'd cared. He'd shown up ready to be a good guest, and he'd been met with mockery. Back in the studio, Lorraine was being briefed by producers during the commercial break. People were talking over each other. Damage control was already being discussed. But there was no way to undo what had happened. No way to erase those words from the broadcast. When they came back from commercial, Lorraine's tone had shifted dramatically. She was subdued, almost robotic as she introduced the next segment. The sparkle was gone. The confidence had evaporated. She looked like someone who knew they'd made a terrible mistake but wasn't quite ready to admit it. Throughout the rest of the show, she kept glancing at the empty chair where Jim had been sitting, like she couldn't quite believe he'd actually left. Like some part of her had expected him to come back, to accept her treatment, to play along with the humiliation. But he didn't come back, because why would he? What possible reason could there be to return to a conversation with someone who had so thoroughly disrespected him? The other guests that morning were noticeably uncomfortable. A cookbook author who was supposed to demonstrate a recipe kept her answers short, polite, but distant. A musician promoting his new album seemed eager to finish his segment and leave. Nobody wanted to risk becoming the next target. You could feel the tension through the screen, the way Lorraine overcompensated with enthusiasm that felt forced, the way she laughed too loudly at things that weren't particularly funny. She was trying to reclaim the energy of her show, but it was like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. Jim Broadbent's absence hung over the entire broadcast. The empty chair, the unfinished interview, the reminder that actions have consequences. What made it worse for Lorraine was that Jim had been nothing but professional right up until he left. He hadn't shouted, hadn't sworn, hadn't made a scene in the traditional sense. He'd simply stated his boundaries and enforced them, which made her behavior look even worse by comparison. She'd pushed and pushed, expecting him to just take it, expecting him to smile through the insults because that's what guests do. They promote their projects and they put up with whatever the host dishes out because that's the game. But Jim had changed the game. He'd said no, and that simple act of self-respect had exposed everything wrong with the dynamic Lorraine had tried to establish. The interview that was supposed to last 15 minutes had lasted less than 5. 5 minutes for a career's worth of goodwill to evaporate. 5 minutes to go from beloved morning television host to cautionary tale. And through it all, Jim had maintained his dignity. That was perhaps the most damaging part for Lorraine. She couldn't paint him as difficult or unreasonable. The footage showed exactly what had happened. Her words, her tone, her complete lack of respect for someone who had earned it 1,000 times over. Jim Broadbent had spent decades being the consummate professional, showing up on time, knowing his lines, supporting his fellow actors, never complaining, never demanding special treatment, just doing the work and doing it well. He'd played kings and commoners, heroes and villains, lead roles and supporting parts. He'd done it all with the same level of commitment and grace. He'd never been the subject of scandal, never been accused of being difficult to work with, never given anyone a reason to doubt his character. And in one morning, Lorraine Kelly had decided that none of that mattered, that it was acceptable to reduce him to jokes about his age and appearance. That entertainment value justified cruelty. She'd gambled that he would just sit there and take it, that his professionalism would keep him in that chair no matter what she said, that his desire to promote his film would override his self-respect. She'd gambled wrong. The audience's reaction told the whole story. They didn't applaud when Jim was insulted. They didn't laugh at the jokes at his expense. They sat in uncomfortable silence until he stood up for himself, and then they gave him a standing ovation. They knew what they'd witnessed. They knew the difference between good-natured teasing and genuine cruelty. They recognized that Lorraine had crossed a line, multiple lines, and they showed their support for the man who refused to accept that treatment. That's what made this moment so powerful. It wasn't just about one actor walking off one show. It was about the broader question of how we treat people, especially people who have earned respect through decades of dedicated work. Jim Broadbent didn't owe Lorraine Kelly his dignity. He didn't owe her the right to mock him on national television. He didn't owe her the performance of pretending that her words were acceptable. He owed himself better than that, and he gave himself better than that by leaving. The conversation that should have happened was obvious. Lorraine should have asked about the film, about Jim's approach to the character, about working with the director and cast, about what drew him to the project, about the themes and the story. There were 100 interesting, respectful questions she could have asked, questions that would have given viewers insight into the creative process, questions that would have made for engaging television without requiring anyone to be diminished. But she'd chosen a different path. She decided that controversy was more valuable than content, that getting a reaction was more important than having a conversation, that her entertainment was worth more than his humanity. And it had backfired spectacularly. Jim's walk off the set wasn't planned. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a man reaching his limit and making a choice in real time. You could see it in his body language. The way he paused before standing, the way he carefully removed his microphone, the way he apologized to the audience. These weren't the actions of someone looking for attention. These were the actions of someone who had tried to be patient, tried to be professional, and finally realized that continuing the interview would require accepting unacceptable treatment. Lorraine's attempts to minimize what happened made it worse, calling it banter, suggesting Jim was being too sensitive, implying that the problem was his reaction rather than her actions. It was a masterclass in how not to handle a situation you created. The woman in the front row who shook her head became symbolic of the audience's response. She'd seen enough, heard enough, and she made her feelings clear without saying a word. That gesture said everything that needed to be said about who was in the wrong. This wasn't about someone being unable to take a joke. This was about someone being subjected to a series of insults, disguised as jokes, and deciding they deserve better. Jim Broadbent walked out of that studio with his dignity intact, his reputation not only undamaged but enhanced. He'd shown that kindness doesn't mean being a doormat, that professionalism doesn't mean accepting abuse, that there's strength in knowing when to walk away. Lorraine Kelly was left to face the consequences of her choices, sitting in that chair, watching a respected actor leave her set, realizing too late that she'd mistaken cruelty for entertainment. The empty chair told the story better than any words could. It was a physical representation of the respect that had been lost, the conversation that could have been, the bridge that had been burned. And all of it happened because someone forgot the most basic rule of being a host. You're there to make your guests comfortable, to draw out interesting stories, to create a space where people want to share themselves with your audience. You're not there to tear people down. You're not there to make yourself feel superior at their expense. You're not there to confuse meanness with wit. Jim Broadbent understood this. That's why he'd been such a successful actor for so many years. He understood collaboration, respect, the importance of lifting others up rather than pushing them down. Lorraine Kelly forgot it. And in forgetting it, she created a moment that would define her career in ways she never intended. The interview that never finished, the actor who walked away, the host who went too far. It became a cautionary tale about power dynamics and respect, about the responsibility that comes with having a platform, about the difference between entertainment and exploitation. Jim Broadbent didn't need to give a press statement afterwards. His actions had spoken clearly enough. He'd drawn a line and enforced it. He'd shown that even in an industry that often demands people swallow their pride, there are still boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. And he'd done it all without raising his voice, without losing his temper, without compromising who he was as a person. He'd simply said, "Enough is enough," and acted accordingly. That's the power of knowing your worth, of understanding that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone has a microphone and a camera, of recognizing that walking away can be the strongest statement you make. The 36 seconds that changed everything weren't dramatic in the traditional sense. There was no shouting match, no thrown objects, no theatrical exit, just a series of increasingly disrespectful comments met with patience until patience ran out. And then a man stood up, removed his microphone, and left, taking with him any illusion that what had happened was acceptable, leaving behind an empty chair and a host who had to face what she'd done. That empty chair said more than 1,000 words ever could. It said that respect matters, that dignity matters, that there are consequences for treating people badly. That entertainment doesn't justify cruelty. That fame doesn't give you the right to belittle others. That even the kindest, most professional people have limits. Jim Broadbent found his limit that morning, and when he found it, he honored it. He walked away from the disrespect and toward his own self-worth. He chose himself over the show, his dignity over the publicity, his peace over the platform. And in doing so, he gave everyone watching permission to do the same, to recognize when they're being mistreated, to understand that it's okay to remove yourself from situations where you're not valued, to know that standing up for yourself doesn't require aggression. Sometimes it just requires the courage to leave. The studio fell silent after he left. The applause faded. The cameras kept rolling. And Lorraine Kelly sat there in the wreckage of her own making, learning the hardest way possible that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Some words, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. Some damage, once done, cannot be undone. And some people, once disrespected, will simply stand up and walk away, taking their dignity with them, leaving nothing behind but a lesson for anyone paying attention.